Welcome back to another episode of STS Knows Best. I am my stake technology specialist, Jared, and I am here to help you make your ward or stake have the best broadcast possible. In this video, we're going to talk about the two very basic setups you need is how do you set up OBS, which is an open broadcasting platform, very simple to use once you've been shown how to use it, and broadcast using Zoom. This video series also is focusing predominantly on Windows users. You can do these with Linux or with a Mac. I don't deal a lot with those when it comes to this, and I find that more people that I talk to are using Windows, so that's going to be what this video series is really geared towards. I'm going to start with a completely blank slate of a computer, something that has not been used at all before. So right here you can see all I have is just a generic wallpaper background. This is a freshly installed copy of Windows 11. We are only using Windows 11 in this series for now because Windows 10 is, as of the time of this recording, it's not supported anymore, and there is no Windows 12 yet. So we're just doing Windows 11 for now. So there's my desktop. There's nothing on there now. And like I'd mentioned, we are going to install a couple different programs. First thing is we're actually going to download and install a couple things before we install all of them. And it'll all make sense, but just go with me slowly. And I'll do this in real time. There may be a couple times when I'll speed up or do a quick cut. So I'm opening up a generic browser, and I am going to search for OBS download. OBS is a free platform. You should not be paying for it. If you find a link that asks you to pay for it, you probably found the wrong one. There are different versions, like I'd mentioned. You can get this for a Mac or a Linux user. We are looking at Windows in this case. It does still work on Windows 10, but as I said before, Windows 10 is no longer officially supported by Microsoft. You might have some extended support, but for the real gist of it, I would not recommend it. All right, I'm going to save this as into my downloads. And that's one. I'm not going to install it yet, though. We're going to come back to this. Next thing is we're going to need to get a couple other utilities. Virtual AB cable. So this is a program that is free. It's kind of donationware. I did pay for a version of this when I first started, and it's nice to kick them a few bucks just to say thank you for what they've done, because this is a very important piece of software. What this software does is it enables you to virtually hand audio from one program to another within your computer as if you would physically routed audio. And that's going to be really important because we're going to use a bunch of different audio sources potentially. We want to make sure that the right stuff is fed into Zoom, and you need a virtual cable to do that, and that's what this does. There are a few versions of them. I recommend getting the newest and most stable version. So right here is the one I'm getting. And again, there's Windows and Mac versions here. I'm only getting the Windows version. I'm going to save this, same place I saved OBS. Next thing we're going to need is we are going to need to get Zoom. So if you go to zoom.us, you'll be faced with that. There is another video that I have that is going to show you how to get the Zoom account set up. Because if you're just using a personal version of Zoom, your own login of Zoom, that's not tied in with a church account, there will be some limitations and some other things that I will cover in different videos. But in this video, we're going to assume that you already set up your Zoom account. You're using a church-connected Zoom account. You just need the right software. There is 32 and 64-bit versions for Windows users. 32-bit is older, not as recommended, and in fact, Zoom has already announced that as of December of 25, they're not even supporting the 32-bit anymore. So make sure you can get the 64-bit if at all possible. Any modern computer you're using now should already be 64-bit. And I'm going to save that as well. Now those are the only three things that you really need for the most basic of setups. So that's what we're going to work with for now. Now that I got all three of those downloaded, I'm going to minimize my browser window and I'm going to open up my downloads. And again, this is a very clean install. There's nothing in here yet. I'm going to unpack the zipped virtual cables. So I'm going to right click on that and then go to extract all. And there we have all of that. Now, there's a lot of stuff in that folder, but I'm going to look for the VB cable setup. And again, if you have a 64-bit system, which you pretty much do, you want to utilize that. So I'm going to use the VB cable setup X64. I'm going to right click, and I just want to make sure that I have all the permissions I need to get things to work. When you're installing drivers and some things like this, it's better if you know if it's a safe program and you can trust it. In this case, I do. I'm going to run as administrator, so I don't have any issues with permissions. It does ask you to verify, but if you have admin privileges, it shouldn't be very difficult. And if you don't have admin privileges, you probably need to talk to whoever does have the admin privileges of the computer you're using. You'll have other issues down the road. Okay, I'm going to install that driver. I clicked on install driver. It looks like nothing is happening for a little while. That does happen, but it does work. See, okay, so it worked. It said complete, and thanked me for, and took me to their website. Again, you may want to consider donation because what they've done for us is pretty sweet here. Okay, so now that that's done and installed, it did say you want to do a quick reboot. So I will, but first I want to finish installing all 3 of my programs. Next program I'm going to install is going to be OBS itself. OBS, very simple, very easy program. You may have a problem in some cases with some of the things that I'm having you install where the computer will say, this is not from a trusted source, are you sure? If you're careful, and if you get the ones that I'm using, and you're not getting some fake versions from a less trustworthy website, you should be able to go ahead and proceed. I do recommend doing this on a new computer or on a computer that if you mess up, you can reinstall Windows or something. It may not be a good idea to install this on your primary working computer unless you're comfortable enough with the fact that you might mess other things up for your computer. So when you go to work on Monday, oops, my Zoom doesn't work or whatever. So, think about that. Okay, OBS has been installed. I'm not going to launch it yet. I'm just going to hit finish. And I'm going to do one more install. I'm going to install Zoom. Once Zoom is installed, then I'll do a quick reboot. You don't always really need to do a reboot every time the software says you do, but something big like a virtual audio cable, that's going to make a difference with how OBS functions. And another pro tip I will say is that there are times when you will think something is wrong, OBS is broken. Sometimes OBS needs the program itself to close and restart in order for you to use it properly. So just be aware of that. Okay, Zoom is installed, it's running. I'm not signed in yet, but that's fine. I've got all 3 of those going. I am going to reboot my computer now. Very exciting part, watching it reboot. I guess I can change angles. Some of the other things that we'll do in this video is we're going to do the very basic version of what it takes to get this set up so you can broadcast using Zoom and OBS. If you want to broadcast with just Zoom and nothing else, I don't feel like that needs a whole lot of extra help. So I probably won't be making a video on that unless I get requests to do that later, but let me know. What we're going to do with OBS is we're going to use OBS as our way of ensuring that we can control everything that gets sent to the broadcast stream without accidentally forgetting to mute a mic or turn off a camera feed when the sacrament is being done, things like that. Okay, and now my computer has finished with the rebooting process. So I'm now signed back in and I've got my programs. I do recommend, for the convenience, if this is going to be a dedicated broadcast computer for your unit, I like to pin Zoom to the start. I also like to pin it down to the taskbar at the bottom here. And I also will find myself unpinning things that I really don't want to be distracted by when it comes time to doing the broadcast. I'm not deleting these apps, I just don't want them there invisible when I'm trying to focus on broadcasting. So OBS and Zoom are typically 2 things that I will pin to both the start and the taskbar just to make sure they're easily accessible. And sometimes I'll even move them higher in priority, so it's some of the first things I see in that bar. Okay, so now we're going to do our first setup into OBS. So I'm going to launch OBS. It's that sort of circle with the three elements there, like a yin, yang, yin. Anyway, we got the three elements there. First time you open up OBS, you're going to be asked, what are you going to do with it? Streaming, recording, or using the virtual camera? You can really do any one of these three. It just kind of has some ideas for presets. You can change your settings later. I personally, what we're doing here is we're going for the virtual camera. So that's the preset option I'm using. And again, you can always change it. By default, it goes to a 1080p resolution. That's all you really need for the broadcast that we do. I wouldn't recommend going 4K. It's just, with streaming, it's not really enough to be worth it. All right, and now we have a very clean blank slate. I'm gonna go ahead and maximize this program so we can see all the detail a little better. It's pretty empty and pretty stark, and it feels, this is where people get lost. They feel a little lost and confused as to what to do with this. Well, the first thing we're gonna do is we are going to go into the settings. That's in the bottom right-hand corner. And you can look around through these. I do recommend some caution. If you're gonna change a setting, know what it is first, or know what you've changed so you can change it back. Nothing you change is necessarily permanent, but if you don't know what you're doing, you might find yourself struggling with broadcasts a little later. So I don't recommend clicking around a lot. One thing you do want to check for is the output. If you're going to do a funeral or something that is permissible to be recorded and archived, then you may want to consider looking at your recording path. Make sure you know where that is, and you can change it to a different location on your system if you don't like where it defaults the recording to. That's under the output option. We're going to go to audio. Audio is very important for what we're going to do. You don't have to change all of the settings, but there is something that we do want to change. If you scroll down a little under advanced, there's something that says monitoring device, and we have it set to default. So that means if someone is listening in with headphones and they want to hear the audio going through the program, where does the audio go through? Well, we don't want it to actually go out to headphones because you're probably doing this sitting in a chapel. You don't want to be distracting. So instead, we're going to use those virtual cables that we created earlier. So we're going to go down to where it says cable input, VB audio virtual cable. That is going to be our monitoring device. So the audio levels we're going to see in this program, they're actually going to be piped out to this virtual cable. The other end of the virtual cable is going to go to Zoom. So they basically we're creating a virtual audio pipeline to go from this program into Zoom, not anywhere else into real speakers. That is pretty much the only setting you need to change under audio. Video, again, we already set that 1080p for that first setup, so we're going to leave that. Hotkeys, this is just where you can go to set up shortcuts. So if you want to make a transition scene by doing Control S or something, you can make those changes. That's just up to you. I'm not going to worry about accessibility. And advanced, again, I wouldn't recommend playing around a lot with this unless you know what you're doing and are comfortable trying to undo things you've done. All right, so basically the only thing we really changed that mattered was that one audio setting, making the monitor. I like to get a little more visual on these controls, so I'm going to hover my mouse between that line right there, and you see how it pops white kind of there? When you get it just right, you can resize the windows. So I like to give myself a little more room because I like to see different audio sources here, and you're not going to be using that many of them really if you do it right, but I brought them in anyway. All right, so now we've got our basic scenes. We still don't have anything coming in. It is a black screen. So the first thing we need to do is we need to have picture so people can see the broadcast. And secondly, we also need to have that audio source so people can hear the broadcast. You got to have those two things at a minimum. Now, if you're using a laptop, you probably already have a webcam on the laptop, but you do not want to use that because then people will see you using the computer. You're going to need a webcam. So I'm going to set up a webcam. And there's also different ways to feed audio. I don't know what your building is like or what your tools are like, so I'm going to show you a few different options on how to use audio. First step, let's get into the video. All right, so the first camera I'm going to use, this is just a very simple basic webcam. This is Microsoft LifeCam. It's a 1080p camera. It's perfectly sufficient, but it doesn't have zoom. It doesn't have pan and tilt controls, like I can't zoom in on the speaker or anything like that. There are other videos where we'll use mounted PTZ cameras, or we'll do an NDI protocol through the network. Don't worry if you don't know what those fancy words mean, those are other videos. But in this video, I'm not making any recommendations on cameras. I'm just gonna show you the concept using this webcam. You can use whatever cam you feel like you would like to use. I would say if you have the ability, you're gonna want a camera that you can zoom in with an optical zoom. You want an optical zoom, not a digital zoom. And if you really can get fancy, something with some controls where you can change the angle. They call that pan and tilt. So pan, tilt, and zoom, or PTZ for short, is optional. But it's definitely the way you would go if you have all the resources. But again, for the sake of this video, just using a basic webcam so you can see what that looks like. All right, so I've plugged this camera in. It does have a blue light, meaning that the computer recognizes it and is powering it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add that into the software. So I'm going to go back to my software here, and you'll notice that already on the bottom, these levels are crazy high. You see that? That is because I am holding this right next to my mouth, and I'm talking really loudly into it, and it's overloading it. So it already picked up the audio from this webcam, even though I didn't configure it. That may or may not be your experience. If you're using a laptop and it has a built-in mic, because they usually do, you might already have had levels there as well. You do not want to use that microphone, and we'll get back to that in a sec. First, let's go to our camera, like I mentioned. So there are two different sections that are very important that you understand how to use. The bottom left is your scenes. And a scene is basically all of the different resources you want for one type of moment. So you might have a scene for before church starts. You might have another scene for when you have speakers and everything. Then you could have another scene for when you're momentarily paused because the sacrament's being blessed and passed. And then you might have another scene at the end of the meeting. Those are just examples, and we'll explain how that works. For now, we're just going to use the generic scene called scene. Each scene has its own list of sources, and that's the second pane that is there by default. And notice that there are no sources, which means there's nothing being fed into this particular scene. So that's why we have a black screen here. So I'm going to go click on the plus button down here in sources. And you have a whole list of things that you can add. In this case, I want to add this webcam. I'm doing it for the video part, not the audio part. This program, OBS, does let you differentiate between the audio features and the video features of a webcam that has a built-in mic. Sometimes they do come together as being like, if you import a camera, you'll get both the audio and the video, but they are controlled independently of each other. I'm going to click on plus. I'm going to go to video capture device, and it's going to ask me what name we want to use. You do not want to leave it a blank name or the default name because you might end up having multiple sources. In fact, you probably will. I would also not just call it webcam, because if you're using a laptop that has a built-in webcam, you might not be sure if you're picking the camera that's built into the laptop where you're just staring at the camera, or if it's one of these that you're adding in. So in this case, I'm just going to give it the name of the camera I intend it to be for, which is a Microsoft LifeCam. You can call it something different. I recommend just naming it what you name it. Okay, and if you already have a camera added from before, like this is a different scene and you're just trying to bring stuff you've already used in other scenes in, they'll be listed all the other ones you already have, add existing. You do not want to add a new source for something you've already added before. You're just going to create a lot of redundancies. So if it's a camera that you have not added to OBS at all in a different scene or anywhere else, you're going to create new. Otherwise, look to see if you already have it under existing. In this case, new setup, I don't. Okay. Now by default, you'll notice that this already went straight to the camera that I wanted to use. That's because I am using a desktop right now, and this desktop has no other source. There is no other video source because it's a desktop. If it was a laptop, there's a good chance you would have just seen yourself looking back at you in this. That is not what you want to use for broadcasts. So under device, even though we gave it a name, that's just a name. It could be any available device on your system. So when I hit the drop-down list, you'll notice that I see only one option, and that is the Microsoft LifeCam. But if you're on a laptop, you will see Microsoft LifeCam and probably your computer's existing built-in webcam. And if you don't see the option for this yet, that means you forgot to plug it in first. You really should have plugged it in first. But you can fix that by hitting cancel, plugging it in, and then going back into that. In fact, I'll show you how to do that now. So let's say, oops, I linked it to the wrong thing. I'm going to double click on it here, and it takes you right back to this page where then you can hit the right option in the drop-down list. In this case, the right option is the LifeCam Studio. All the other options here, you do not need to mess with, at least in this case. So I'm just going to click OK. And again, you can always come back for it. Biggest issue, this camera, well, you'll notice it doesn't have as many pixels as the image I'm trying to use here. It doesn't fit. When you click on an item in your sources that's a video item, it'll give you these red crosshairs. That tells you how much of the picture it'll take up when you're actually broadcasting. If you don't change these settings, you're only going to see that little picture in the corner, which is kind of what you're seeing in this video here where I'm inside this little box in the corner. I did that on purpose, but you don't want that to be the case for when you do a broadcast. Now, if I drag it to the corners here, you'll notice that it still doesn't take up the whole space. There's still about 480 pixels of unused space. That's because we are now broadcasting widescreen. That is pretty much everything that is the standard. But a lot of webcams, even good webcams, are still broadcasting the old 4:3 kind of square-ish aspect ratio. If that's the case, what I recommend doing is grabbing this corner. So if you want to resize anything, you just grab your mouse in where the red block in the corner is, and you can just drag it down until it'll kind of pop, or not doesn't necessarily pop, but you can see how when I keep going, I get these like gray hash marks. Anything that's in the gray hash mark means you have a video there, but it won't be seen. It's out of the viewable area. So I'm going to drag it just about here where I have as much of the video in frame as possible, but not any crosshairs. Now, the problem is still, that means I'm going to have to lose some of the top and the bottom. So right here, you can see I have more of these red blocks on the side. Those are right on the middle of the video. So I can use that as a gauge to see how much of the video is being cut off from the top or bottom. I want to make sure it's kind of more centered. So I'm just going to drag in the middle here, and I'm just going to get it right there. So that red block is kind of in the middle of the viewable area. That means I'm getting that. Now, depending on how you have it set up, maybe you want the top half to be visible for how you have the camera set up, or the bottom half more. But I find as a good general practice, dead center is the way to go. Okay, so now I've got my picture just the way I want. If I ever want to mute this video source at any time, you just hit that eyeball right there. So if you hit that eyeball, that video source is muted temporarily. Okay, I'm going to turn that back on right now. So now I've got that. Let's go talk about my audio, because audio is very important. In fact, I would say if you really have to prioritize one thing over the other, video is not as important as audio. Because if you kind of have a fuzzy picture, or you can't see the exact speaker very well, but you can hear everything they're saying very clearly, that's going to make the biggest difference on the viewing experience. So you really want to make sure the audio is done correct. That's the most important part. Down here, you'll notice that, as I mentioned earlier, all of a sudden when I plugged in this camera, I started getting levels here. Those levels are there because my system detected only one audio source and it just put it in there. But I want to specify what audio source I'm using, because again, if you're on a laptop, your computer probably already has a built-in microphone and you do not want to use that. If you use that when you are broadcasting, people are going to hear you coughing and whispering, and they're going to hear a faint echo of the actual speaker. You never want to use your built-in mic, if at all possible. So to make sure I'm using the right audio source, when you go to the audio sources here, desktop is empty right now on mine because I don't have a built-in one. Once I added this live cam, it detected the microphone from the camera, and now these 3 dots, if I click on that, will let me get some options on them. One of them I want to go to is Properties. Now here it says, what device am I actually using for this? And it's set to default. I never use the default setting, because if you plug in a different microphone or if other things are in your system, what is the system's default mic will change periodically. So you don't want to depend on a system default. You want to specify the device. So I am actually going to take both of these that are already there and I'm going to mute them out. Just because these will show up everywhere and I don't necessarily want this audio with every scene. So I'm going to do that. Instead, I'm going to add in my sources an additional source that is audio only, audio capture. And then I'm going to say LifeCam mic. So it comes from my Microsoft LifeCam. This does not show the LifeCam that I added earlier because that was added as a video source. This is being added as an audio source, so it shows up differently. And it's saying, well, where are we getting that from? And I can leave the other one as defaults or whatever, I don't care. But this one, I'm going to specify LifeCam Studio. Now you'll notice that I have 3 sources. Levels here are ridiculous, so let's bring that down. So we're just hovering right close to the red without going into red very often or barely poking into it. I also don't want to see all of these other input sources that I'm not using anyway. They're distracting me. So I'm going to remove these sort of by hiding them. Now if you mess up and you hid something you didn't mean to hide, that's okay. You can click on the 3 dots here and go to unhide all and they'll all come back. But I'm going to go into the 3 dots and I'm going to hide at least the other one. This one, nothing is ever going to be there anyway. Now, the other thing that we need to know is, are we for sure making sure that it outputs to the right place? Most of the time when you add a new audio source, it'll come up with audio monitoring is monitor off. You can't have monitor off. If you want that sound to go through to Zoom, it needs to go out the monitoring source, which, if you remember our settings from earlier, we went to audio, and advanced monitoring is going out through that virtual cable that we installed. So I have to tell it that this will monitor. This will go to that virtual cable. So I'm going to put it to monitor and output. If you do not change it, it will not go out. So even though I had levels at this mic thing, even if I didn't mute it in the program, it still wouldn't go to Zoom unless you changed the setting. And every time you add another audio source, if you add multiple, you have to make sure that you come here to change that setting. Otherwise, it just won't work. Okay, so now I've got these 2 things showing up, audio and video, and they're both there. And I can mute one or the other, and it'll temporarily disappear. Cool, right? Okay. Now, let's talk about getting that into Zoom. And it's now asking me to sign into Zoom, which I'm happy to do. But I'm not going to let you watch me sign into Zoom, so I'm going to pause this recording for a quick sec. Actually, I don't need to pause the recording. What am I thinking? I'll just transition away so you can see me, but you can't see what I'm typing. How smart is that? Okay. And again, I mentioned this briefly earlier, you need to make sure that whatever Zoom account you're using, it's the official one tied into the LDS account. You do not want to use a different account. There's a few different reasons for it. The biggest reason is if you're going to use the official church platform for broadcasting, it won't show up right. And that's another video. We're not going to cover that in this. Again, this one, we're just showing you how to make sure that you Zoom to using OBS. Okay, so now I'm in my general meeting settings. If you have already set up upcoming broadcasts, they will show up here on this side. In this video, I just set up a quick test webinar. I called it test, and I'm going to join it. In order to join or to start it, I'm not joining an existing one, I'm hosting it. You don't want to click on new meeting, you don't want to click on join. You can click on schedule if you need to, but in this case, I already have it here. I'm going to click on the webinar and I'm going to click on start. All right, Now, already this is not showing the things I want to show. I do have a background image that my account I set up whenever my video is turned off. That's helpful. Some people do that when you're not supposed to broadcast the blessing and the passing of the sacrament. However, I prefer to show something else. So I'm going to turn on my video. But notice I have this list of sources. It's supposed to be looking for the LifeCam Studio, but nothing's showing up. Why? Well, because I'm actually going to feed it the OBS video feed. And in fact, OBS is already using the LifeCam, so they can't both use it at the same time. I'm going to change the camera source to OBS Virtual Camera. And then the second thing is I'm going to make sure the audio is set the way I want. For audio, I do not want to use the same as the system, and I don't want to use this. I want to use the cable AB output, or the cable VB audio virtual cable. That is the one that is whatever is going into OBS is what's going now into Zoom. That is a much better way to go because then I can change different audio feeds and audio settings without having to go back and forth between the two programs. If you set this up right, you don't have to ever go back to Zoom during the Zoom meeting. You can do everything in the one screen in OBS, which is really the whole point of it. All right, so now I have got those two settings set up the way I like. Okay, so it still says that I don't have any video turned off when I came in. And if you turn it on, you might get an error message the first time, or you might see this. This is a default temporary thing that OBS puts out if you haven't turned on a very important feature, which I didn't do yet on purpose because I wanted you to see what would happen if you don't turn it on. If you see this, or if you get an error message that says it can't start your webcam, we need to change a setting. So we're going to go back to OBS, and I'm not going to minimize this because I can see it in the background here, but over here on the controls, this is where the settings were that we went to earlier, but there's also something here that says Start Virtual Camera. I'm going to click on Start Virtual Camera, go back to Zoom, and now look at what Zoom is showing me. Zoom is showing me exactly what's coming out of OBS. If I turn my video on and off now, there we go. You can see that coming and going. I could also, if I really wanted to, I could switch it to the webcam, but you don't want to do that because you want to control everything from OBS. Same thing with audio. Double check here and make sure when it says select a microphone, you're using cable output and not using a regular microphone. One thing I also want to mention, the first time you set up Zoom, they do a feature where they mirror the image, which means they reverse what you see back on your screen. So right here, this might look fine if you're new to OBS, but I can tell that this is actually a flipped image. It's reversed. If there was text on my screen, I would see the text backwards. Zoom does that. So one thing you want to do is you want to make sure you flip that around. So if you click on the camera, click on that arrow, and then click on audio and video settings, that's going to bring you to here. You're going to want to uncheck mirror my video preview. It'll still look fine to people at home who are watching, but it just messes with your mind when you're the one broadcasting. Really, that's all you need to do with the way I have this set up. Because this microphone isn't going to sound great unless you're sitting in the very front row, because again, this is not a great webcam. This webcam does not have zoom, pan, tilt. I can't angle it. So the assumption is if you're using a webcam like this, you're probably using it on like a monopod or a tripod in the very front row, very close to the speaker, and it'll probably pick them up okay, but you're going to pick up every crying baby and every other sound in the room. So it's not the best, but this is just a proof of concept for this part. Okay, so now I've got it set up. I'm going to minimize my zoom. And so when you minimize zoom, it gives you a little window in the top corner, which right now it's kind of behind my picture. So I'm going to move that window down here so you can see it. That is the zoom window. That is not part of OBS that you see. In fact, if I'll minimize OBS a little bit so you can kind of see the difference here. So that's my zoom window. I'm going to keep that right here. So now, if I want to mute the camera here, it goes off of Zoom. If I want to mute the audio here, it also goes off of Zoom. Zoom no longer has that audio. Now, given where we're set up right here, I'm sure one could say, why would we rather use this? Because that's a lot of extra work. Wouldn't it be easier just to mute the audio, mute the video in my Zoom call when the sacrament goes, and we don't need OBS at all. I understand that thinking, and you're right if that was all we were doing. But this is just the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and put that back down here. I'm going to show you the power of OBS. So we've only got one scene so far. We've talked about this. What if we created another scene so I could have a one button click to do both the audio and the video change when we have something like the sacrament happening? So we've got our scene here, our first scene, and I'm just going to rename this scene. I'm going to right click on it and go to rename, and I'm going to call this something like main, because that's going to be my main image, when we're broadcasting. But I'm going to create a new scene. Now you can create a scene two ways. You can either click down here on the plus in the bottom left-hand corner of the program, or you can right click on an existing scene and duplicate it, and then give it a new name. I don't want to duplicate this one though, because this one, I'm going to create a new scene to show when we have something I don't want shown on the screen, like if the sacrament's being blessed and passed. So I'm going to add a new scene, and I'm going to call this Sacrament Hold. Okay. So here we are with our two options. Notice that in main, we have our two sources, and in our scenes for Sacrament Hold, there are no sources, which means that if I click here, Zoom gets the picture and the sound. If I click here, Zoom gets nothing. That's pretty handy. So now I have one click to do both, and I can monitor my levels and do everything else I need to in this platform and not have to go back to Zoom and worry about doing both audio and video muting when something happens. Okay, now time for one last power user feature that I always like to share once you start creating multiple scenes, and that is using what's called studio mode. So the way I've shown you thus far is the very simplified way is if you click on it, that's what you get. So if I'm just trying to see what's in here and see what kind of sources I may have in this scene, and I click on it, oops, I have now activated that scene, and now no one's seeing anything. I have to click on main, and I can't look around and see what else is happening in other scenes. You are going to get to the point where you might have 3 or 4 scenes, or maybe more. So you need to be able to have access to look and prepare those scenes in advance before activating them like I just did now. So that's where studio mode comes into play. We haven't talked about it yet, but I highly recommend you enable studio mode and use that going forward for everything. So in order to enable studio mode, you just go here to the right-hand side, and second from the bottom is studio mode. Studio mode now gives you 2 displays. One side will show you what your preview is, which is which one am I clicking on here. If I have 3, 4, 5, notice now when I click on these, it doesn't change what is happening in my Zoom window down here. So now I can go through and set up scenes and edit scenes and prepare things without affecting what's on the live broadcast. What I see on the right-hand side of the preview window now is program what is actually going out to Zoom. So now if I want to switch, if I want to go from this hold screen into become what's in the program, there's a transition button right between the two at the top. So if you click on transition, now instead of just clicking between them, I get a gentle fade too, which I kind of like. It looks a little more fancy. So now when I click transition, whatever was in preview, when you click transition, it swaps places. So instead of being, right now I have my sacrament hold is in preview and my main is in my program. If I click transition, it swaps. So now I just have the same button to click between them. Now I do want to say that this is not a very appealing thing for people to watch. Just a black screen with no text, no music, nothing. People might even think if they join in late and if they join in during this, that they're going to think something's wrong with their system. So I have a much better way to go, and that's going to be a separate video subject. So if you'd like to find out what to do with all these other scenes, how to make your scene more interesting when you're trying to put on maybe a before the meeting display or a in between the sacrament display or an after meeting display, I have a better solution for that. You're gonna wanna watch that video. For now, this video is done. It has already taught you everything you need to know on how to set up OBS for basic simple use and Zoom so they can work together. Now that we've got that, then you can start doing the real fun of setting up a lot of custom scenes. We also are gonna have another video that you're gonna wanna watch on setting up better audio sources. There are better ways to get sound than a microphone on a webcam. I highly recommend not using that, so make sure you check out the video on different audio sources. This has been another STS Knows Best, and I'm your steak technology specialist, Jared.